Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I will also be the host for our podcast here today. Excited to have you here as always. It's great. I always look forward to these events for a lot of reasons. One, it's great to connect with all of you that are out there that are participating in part of our community. It's also a great opportunity for me to connect with friends and colleagues who are doing amazing work, and today is no exception. Excited to share with you a little bit about our guest here in a moment. But if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was formed, I guess we're going on 5.5 years ago now. We are a small nonprofit organization that really began around the issue of restraint and seclusion in schools, but it's really far broader than that. It's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. Even broader than that, it's really about all the things that are often being done to kids, very often in the name of behavior, very often kids that are being misunderstood. And of course, the results can be tragic. A lot of kids that are on the wrong side of a lot of punitive and exclusionary discipline not only become disengaged, but often end up kind of moving down the school to prison pipeline. So we are trying to make a difference by working to spread better ideas and better approaches, and trying to help motivate change, and that's really important. So if you are joining us today, I do want to mention real quickly here, our guest today is Jodi Place, who I am lucky to call a friend and colleague, somebody that has a tremendous amount of experience, and you're going to get to meet Jodi here in just a moment. We're going to be talking today and having a great conversation about discipline. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. But before I get to our introduction, a couple of housekeeping things. If you're watching live, just so you know, this is going out live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. We also make it available as an audio podcast. So if you don't have time to listen to the whole show today and you prefer to listen on the go, you're going to be going to the airport, you're making a long commute, whatever it may be, the podcast is a great way to do that as well. Also want to mention that we have a couple of sponsors that help us to do this podcast. And those sponsors are really helpful in terms of enabling us to bring this to you every other week, and sometimes even more frequently. I want to mention two sponsors here today. The first are Ryan and Robert Delana. Robert and Ryan Delana are a father and son team who teamed up to write a book. And the book is called Without Restraint: How Skiing Saved My Son's Life. This book is actually about a story that is not unlike a story that I've heard many times from families where a child was being physically restrained and secluded, where a child had very low expectations placed upon them, where people gave up on the child and even recommended institutional types of supports that would have led to far different outcomes. And in this book, Robert and Ryan actually talk about their journey and talk about how just kind of a unplanned trip to the ski slopes ended up changing kind of the direction of Ryan's life and leading to a child that has been very successful now and in college and doing some amazing work. But it's really about believing in kids and believing and supporting and making a difference. I'm going to read you just a little excerpt off the back cover here, and this is from Ryan. And Ryan says, "The saddest part of my story is what happened to the kids I met along the way who weren't so lucky. Kids who would be doing just fine right now, but are living in group homes or residential programs, all because some doctor or school administrator concluded that they were hopeless and their parents listened." It's an important comment from Ryan, and it's a really good story. So I recommend you check it out. It's of course available on Amazon. We'll try to put the link in the chat as well. Want to mention one other sponsor today, which is Supportable Solutions. Supportable Solutions is a coaching consulting company run by a friend and colleague, Connie Persick. They developed something called the Why Toolkit, which is absolutely fantastic, a way to really kind of get to the deeper why in terms of understanding behavior. And I'm going to share just a quick little intro here about the Why Toolkit.
Connie Persick has created leading-edge work as she has transformed the traditional behavior support plan and functional behavior assessment. Connie's updated FBA and BIP process combines the most recent research-based approaches in a way that resonates with parents and educators. The Why Toolkit is the ultimate testament of the value of human connection over compliance. The Why Toolkit, cutting-edge behavioral supports for the present day. Rethink, reframe, reimagine. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
And I encourage you to check it out. Again, Supportable Solutions, the Y Toolkit. You can actually get a single license to take a look at it, understand what it is, how it works, and see if it might be something that's either helpful if you're working in a school to support children that you're supporting. We also see parents that will get a copy, take a look at it, and then bring it to the school as something that might be helpful in working with and supporting their children. So again, thank you, Connie, for being a supporter of the program here. One other quick announcement I was going to share. And this is kind of exciting. One of the things that we actually are doing right now is we are developing some training, and we're developing some training related to restraint seclusion, which might not surprise you. We're working on some other training as well, but we just launched a first course about restraint seclusion, and this is a training course intended for parents and caregivers. The course is Restraint and Seclusion in Schools, What Parents and Caregivers Need to Know. This is an online course that is now available. And it is a pretty in-depth course. It goes into talking about what restraint and seclusion are, the impact of restraint and seclusion, what you can do if you're a parent and your child is being restrained and secluded. What are the things that you might be able to do to change that? What are the things that you might be able to do if you're not able to collaborate with your school and they're not listening? And we even dive into some brain science and how seeing a child through the lens of the brain and the nervous system can be really helpful. So I'll share a link to that in the chat as well. But I just wanted to announce that we have these courses that are coming online, which is really exciting because it's a way for us to get this information out and hopefully empower more people to be able to influence positive changes. So with that, let's get to why you're really here today. It's not just to hear all my announcements. I am really excited to share and bring up here my friend and colleague, Jodi Place. Jodi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Guy.
Always great to see you. So let me tell folks a little bit about who you are. And of course, you've been serving as a public educator for over 25 years. You started very, very young, right?
Yes,
and prior to becoming a school administrator, you were a nationally board certified English teacher. As an administrator, you have experience leading traditional high school and middle school settings, as well as alternative education. You hold a certification in the Applied Educational Neuroscience program at Butler University, which of course we talk about a lot. And Lori still holds the distinction of being our most frequent visitor on the show. And I don't even know how many times now. It's probably 7 or 8 times.
Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, you also have done work in the Neurosequential Model of education with training with Dr. Bruce Perry. And you published a quick reference guide to ASCD. ASCD, tell me that again. The acronym ASCD.
Well, it's sort of like SAT. It doesn't stand for the same things it used to. So
okay, gotcha. Okay, all right. And supporting emotional regulation in the classroom. So, Jodi, of course, more important distinction is a friend, colleague, somebody I've had the opportunity to listen to and learn from and see speaking in conferences. So it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Excited to have you here. Excited to have you joining with our audience today.
I'm thrilled to be here. I always grow and learn from this experience, and I love that it makes the world smaller because I get to connect with people that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. So again, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about yours and my favorite topic, discipline.
Absolutely. So before we get started with the presentation, I do want to invite people that are watching live, and I know we've got a number of people now that have already joined on live, and I usually ask this before we get here, but if you're watching live now, you have a job. Your job, if you're watching live right now, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always fantastic to see who's joining us, where they're from. I find when we do these, Jodi, a lot of familiar names pop up. And we have a lot of people that really come back, week after week when we're doing these events. Always great to see new people as well that are joining us for the first time. We get we have an amazing audience here. And in fact, you might know this first person that said hello here. Ginger Healy. Ginger is joining us from Utah. Always a pleasure to have Ginger joining us here.
Yes.
But it really is fun to see kind of where people are joining us from. We have got a really broad audience here. We've got a lot of parents and caregivers. We have a lot of self-advocates, autistic self-advocates. We have a lot of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, related professionals. Really is a fantastic community of people coming together, really all in support of positive change. So I've got somebody here, Melissa, a volunteer here from Grafton, Wisconsin. And one of the other things that's always exciting is we tend to have people from all over the world that tune into these. And I don't know if it'll work today, but often I'll say, we have people from Australia and New Zealand, and somebody will pop in and say hello from one of those places. Now, mind you, if you're in Australia or New Zealand right now, it's like probably 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever it may be. So it's bright and early. But anyway, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. So Jodi, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation. It looks like a
Okay.
beautiful presentation here.
Wow.
And we talked about this as we were getting ready to get started. And what we agreed to is that we're going to kind of take questions at the end of the presentation. Now, people that are watching live, if you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to put it in the chat at any time. That said, we're probably going to address most of the questions at the end, really just to give us time to kind of get through the presentation. As I shared with Jodi, it's really easy to get sidetracked, and one question leads to many. So at any rate, we will handle most of those at the end. But you invited me to stick around, and you said, well, if you have a question too, you can jump in. You might regret that. Hopefully you won't.
I will not. I know I will not. I know I will not.
But makes it a fun conversation. And I know, you've got another partner in crime that you present with a lot, and that dynamic can really be helpful as well. So anyway, let me go ahead and let you introduce your topic and take over. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, but I might pop back in periodically to ask questions or with some random comments as we go. So again,
Yeah,
if you're watching live, let us know who you are. And
I love
Jodi,
the interaction. So again, that's what this is all about, that connection we can have. So you brought up Dr. Lori, and it's, even though she's not presenting, she is very much with us today. As I look at the Misunderstandings of Discipline, because actually this is based on, and she's a mentor for me. She is a brilliant educator who is still not only teaching at the university level and traveling, but she also still goes into a classroom to put these practices, this philosophy, this framework into the Applied Educational Neuroscience framework to practice every single day. I mean, just think about that. I don't know how she has all this energy, but aside from her publications being transformative, and just her being so accessible with information, she has a great website, and it's called Revelations in Education. And you can find the 6 misunderstandings of discipline there. And that is the foundation for why I wanted to present on today, because it was something that got me really thinking, and there's so many resources there. So I just would encourage anybody who has not been there to really, really spend some time, because she makes so many things available to keep the conversation going. So let's just jump kind of right in. I really sort of wanted to frame today by thinking about this question, because this is my thought process as I was looking at these 6 misunderstandings. So I kind of challenged myself, and then I guess I'm challenging other educators to consider these 2 questions. Do we view discipline practices as we do instructional ones? And if the answer to that, which for many of us, I think we do not often see those as the same. I mean, they're not the same, but how we approach them. What if we did? And so I thought about, as an instructional leader, because I'm an administrator, what are some instructional norms that exceptional teachers and administrators practice across our field, because they've proven to be so beneficial and positively impact our students and our learning and achievement. So I was thinking about that, and people could add ones that I'm going to not give an exhaustive list. This was, again, my thinking process. So by all means, I hope people will add some that I don't put in here. But I was thinking about how we meet students where they are, not where we assume they should be or believe they should be. As a teacher, we use that information daily on how we create our lessons, how we deliver our lessons, because we want to see students progress. So we find out where they are when we get them, and then we work so hard, and our teachers are both artists and scientists in how they progress our students. That's the sound instructional practice. We understand how to scaffold instruction. And that just all that means, for anybody who might not know what that means, they might hear that a lot, scaffolding instruction. we provide these levels of temporary support so that students can achieve at higher and higher levels as their understanding and skills are acquired. And eventually we're able to remove all of these temporary supports because they are becoming so proficient and independent themselves. So that's, again, we hear about that in our planning as instructional practitioners. And then we value data. We use it to reflect on what's working, what isn't working, and to make informed decisions about the future. And I want to present these first, even though I know we're talking about discipline, because I want you to think about the application of those ideas to discipline. And if we used some of that same best practice as we approach our disciplinary practices. And I think by doing that, it's kind of changed in a lot of ways how I, as an administrator, operate. But I think, again, how it serves not only our students, but our adults in our buildings. So I'll kind of come back to those, but I did want to kind of set that out there on the front end because that's what I started thinking when I was looking at these misunderstandings. And then the next frame was, what about if a student, doesn't understand or have a skill? I don't know many teachers that I think are the very best among us that are like, yep, you just leave them behind. It's okay. No, we have a lot of things that we do because we don't want to leave our children behind. And so, again, this is going to be just the basis of where I stand on this and how I know that what I'm doing as an administrator is the right approach. And I'll get to, I got a little salty last night. Guy, I'm going to tell you in a minute what made me a little salty, but one of my buttons was pushed, but there's thinking behind why this process, because there are individuals who say, I'm an instructional leader. They're administrators. I'm an instructional leader, as if like discipline doesn't fall into that. And it's very troublesome to me as an administrator and as an educator. So here's misunderstanding one that, again, these come directly from Revelations in Education. And so she kind of presents them as common quotes, right? Things that you might hear in some form or fashion. So, I have a lot of trauma in my life and I made it. I'm not putting up with this kind of disrespect. And some of us online right now, we may have felt this, we may have heard this, and that's okay. This is not about shaming at all. But I want to explore this a little bit more deeply. So, trauma. When we first need to come to what we see and view as trauma, and it's just not an event, right? But what happens inside of us, and it can live in our body for many years and be passed on to future generations. And that is so huge to me to think about that if we do not actively work to address trauma, it doesn't just go away. And not only that, but sometimes it gets passed on through generations. And so when I have worked with some of my parents and gotten to know them and their stories, because they honored me to let me know their stories, I could see this play out, that the trauma that they've experienced and how it has impacted the generations beyond them. So this is something that we have to take so seriously. We carry this, it changes how we sense, how we feel, how we learn. And I'm going to emphasize that word, how we learn our stress response system. I know you have had so many great guests on here, Guy, talk about our stress response system. So individuals can go back and look at those, because it truly is knowing more about ourselves and how we work from just a biological standpoint has been altering to how I interact in the world and how I view my own self. And so I just think that it's something that I could not speak more to its importance, but especially as an educator. It's not about being a student. It's not about being a teacher, being a child, being an adult. It's just about being human. And it's when I think about trauma, I'm an English teacher at heart for forever and always. And so I think about the roots of words, and the root of the word trauma is wound, right? And we think of a wound, we think of hurt and pain. And then I think about the root of the word discipline, and that means instruction and knowledge, right? So I just, for me, when I think about these, it's not just about throwing words around. It's like, truly, what do they mean? And do we embody that in our practices and our philosophies? So
I just going to
yeah,
interrupt. I love
yeah,
that you brought up,
yeah.
again, the English teacher in you, but I love that you brought up the origin of the words. I think about, that definition of discipline. I think it was Connections Over Compliance when I was reading that for the first time,
Yeah.
one of Lori's books, and she kind of framed it in that way, getting to the root of discipline. Discipline's really about teaching, and it really does help you to see that differently. So often this idea of discipline is punitive, is exclusionary, is doing something to someone because they did something that you didn't like, right?
Right.
And the connection you made there in the beginning about, what if we looked at discipline the way we think about, what we think about academics, when somebody needs help, and you approach it differently. And I think part of the challenge there is that sometimes it's a matter of judgment. Sometimes it's a matter of taking things personally. Behavior can be tough, and it can be easy to take that personally. And of course, that then
Mhm.
can lead to an adult who becomes dysregulated, and then
Well, I
isn't
think of it too,
getting
Guy.
that logic.
Sometimes it's because an adult is wounded,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Right. I mean, so when I think about trauma, I'm not just thinking about children. I think about the adults, and discipline comes down to the adults. And you talked about punishment. And of course, I know the root of the word punishment too, and that's suffering. So we cannot confuse punishment and discipline, because for me, I am an educator. Yes, my role and title right now is administrator, but at the very core of who I am an educator. So my focus is about teaching and learning, whether that be with students, whether that be with adults, and also me remaining a learner. And so punishment is, the root of that word is suffering.
Mm.
So when we think about somebody who has trauma, do we want to come to that table because we want to help with healing, which I think is part of the learning process, that instruction, that knowledge, or do we want to come and add suffering? Which one do we want to, right? I mean, if you saw someone with an actual physical wound, are you like, I want to help heal. I want to give them care. I want to make sure that I address that so that it isn't going to get worse, do no harm. Or I want to go pour some salt in that and watch them squirm. And right. I mean, maybe that seems hyperbolic, but to me, when I think about the paradigm shift, this is how I kind of approached it. And if we aren't, when we come to the table to talk about discipline, if we are focusing on consequences, which really is also known as punishments, right? Fixing student behavior as if they're broken, which they're not, and without taking inventory and auditing ourselves as adults, then we're not talking about discipline. We're just not. And that just leads me to say, like, how are the adults in your building? How are the adults in your building? Like, what is their level, as you mentioned, of dysregulation right now? Is the climate and culture fostering them to be healthy and well and connected? So, how are you as an adult right now? Are you in a place that you can help somebody who is wounded?
Well, it's such an important point that you make, and this is something that I think I've probably brought up many times, but you can't, I mean, the understanding of trauma to me is critical. The understanding of neuroscience, kind of these things that are related to what you're talking about here, I think are really critical. But you can't be trauma informed because you did a half-day PD on understanding trauma, and you can't just get this trauma informed mindset and change what you're doing in working with children if you're not changing the entire culture of a building, right? I mean, being trauma informed is really about taking that same approach, not just with the kids, but also the teachers and staff. And I think that's an important piece that often gets missed. It's as if this is something magical we're going to do to help better support kids. But if we're not looking first to the adults and the adult nervous system and the adult mindset, we're not going to be able to affect the kinds of changes that we want to affect. But that seems to be a common challenge, is that people begin to get some of these ideas, but they don't get the importance of applying them first to the adults in a building,
which is critical. I mean, we need to put huge exclamation points around that. This is starting with the adults. This is me starting with myself. Again, so I couldn't agree more. And that leads me actually, Guy, you kind of led right into. So sometimes I've done this activity. I've done it reflectively for myself. And I've led adults to do this reflectively. But last night, okay, I was on TikTok because I had to get on TikTok because I had to check on the ginormous baby penguin pesto. If you haven't seen pesto, you're missing out, okay? I'm just telling you, haven't, have you?
I thought I saw a story. This is ringing some bell, but I have not been on TikTok looking at pesto the giant penguin. But I thought I saw a news story. Yeah,
I'm on there because this is me at night. I'm like, I will get on there and I'm like, I'm going to check on pesto. Love him. He makes me happy. It just it does regulate me. Okay, you can't see this ginormous baby penguin without feeling a little bit better. And the algorithm pops somebody on my screen. And it's someone who proclaims to be an educational philosopher and an instructional leadership coach. And he, in this particular TikTok that interrupted my pesto viewing, he was talking about basically trauma-informed, being about lowering expectations. And it pushed the button. It pushed Jodi's button last night because
I'm sorry. Who did you say that was?
I did not say his name.
Okay. I think I might know, but I was just curious.
Bet you do. But he, yes, he says he's an educational philosopher and coach for instructional leadership. And, I consider myself pretty strong in the instructional leadership category. But I listened to what he said because I do think you have to listen. And, it was just, frankly, it was just untrue. And so actually, let me put it a different way. It was just lies about what being trauma informed is, because everything he said was not true. So I had to actually put this into practice because my buttons were pushed and I had to think of how I was going to regulate. So I did that by connected with some individuals that are very calming to me. Some of them probably are either going to watch this at some point or are online, Gingers being one of them, because they're my trusted, safe individuals. And then I did watch some extra pesto videos because I love this penguin. But I don't say that to joke and jest. I say that because honestly, I felt it got me really dysregulated because I felt like I was tired last night. You're going to work every day. You're working so hard all day long. You are interacting with a lot of dysregulated individuals at different times. And so it just pushed my button in that moment because I felt like it was just doing a disservice to the work that we're doing. But I had to use this myself. But I think that if you don't know your own triggers, I know exactly what the tells are. My family knows the tells for my triggers in terms of what I get a splotch on my face when I get really upset. And so sometimes they back away when they see the splotch. But in all honesty, I know I have assessed myself to know what my own buttons are. And I know in those moments, I am not in my best place to help anyone else, right? I am not. And that's why I'm saying sometimes when a student pushes one of our buttons, okay, that is when we want to, in that very moment, react, not respond. We want to react. And I'm just telling you that is the worst time because we are not in a place that we can help anyone else learn. We cannot teach. We cannot walk beside them. We have to take care of ourselves. So I think it's really important as adults. We all have them. It's so normal and appropriate. We all have them. Again, I'm not coming to you from judgment. I have a list of things that really can get me agitated. So I don't say it in any kind of judgment. It is human. Brene Brown says that, we cannot shame people in the midst of struggle. I mean, they're just being human. And so I don't know. I mean, Guy, maybe you don't have any push buttons, but I have a few. And last night,
I have some people you could talk to that could probably tell you that I have a couple buttons.
just a couple. Okay,
Just a couple.
just a couple, and that's okay. Again, it's okay for us to validate that we all have them. Just because we go in and
Absolutely.
we have the role of administrator or teacher, mom, wife, all of those things. Yes, I mean those are all important roles, but we're human, and
Mhm,
so I
mhm,
want to
mhm.
start normalizing. I've told students before I don't like being lied to. And so sometimes when a student, and understand, I don't take it personally because they think they're going to get in trouble. And I'll say, I would rather you say, Miss Place, I don't want to answer that question than say a lie to me. Because like I want to give them that option. But I know for me, I don't like to be lied to.
Mm.
And so I have to really make sure I do some of my regulation because it can make me more reactive in that moment. And I might not make the best decisions of how to help a student. So that's just
And you're right. I mean, no matter how much of this no matter how deeply you've taken a dive into understanding the impacts of trauma, understanding dysregulation,
Mhm.
understanding stress behavior, you can get there. And it can,
Yeah.
I mean, and there's so many different things that I always love the kind of the work kind of about like the window of tolerance and how
Yes.
looking at our stress, looking at our experiences, all of these things can kind of change, and even acknowledging that all of us have a fluctuating capacity.
Yeah.
Not every day is the same. Not every day is full of the same kinds of and I don't know, I know I have these days where it's like you get to the point where it's like one more thing, that's going to push you over.
Yeah.
Where on a normal day, maybe I'm a little bit more within my window of tolerance. But I think acknowledging not only that it's normal, but that it can fluctuate, I think is so critical. I did want to pause here real quick and just a couple other people that jumped on board here. We had Carrie here that said, great to see yet another school leader on your program. Jodi Jenkins Place is the
Oh,
best, the best. Thank you for the work that you
serious
do.
best.
And mutual friend here, Joe Brummer from Connecticut. So
Mhm.
great to see Joe here, and Jess Harris from Indiana as well. So anyway,
You just like that right there. I mean, people need to write their names down and like read everything, watch everything they can get their hands on from those individuals. They have taught me, they have so fundamentally influenced everything I'm saying today about who I am as an administrator. So I'm honored that they're here. Truly, I am honored that they're here. And they were honestly, some of those individuals were in my group last night when I had my button pushed. But I say that just because as an administrator, and I'm going to use that as my lens right now when I talk, because again, a big part of my job is working with students and the discipline process. Again, if I do not know myself, I'm going to not be relational. I'm not going to be looking for prevention and intervention. I'm going to be reactive. And it's in that place that there's not going to be any learning or teaching. I'm not going to be an effective teacher, and I'm going to create cues for the person sitting across from me that I am not safe and they're not going to be able to learn from me. So
We had an article written by a volunteer at one point, Jennifer Abinat, who is fantastic. She wrote an article. The title was "Regulation Before Education." I mentioned this one a lot because the title of it was so important. And we often think about these things in the context. Again, we think about them in the context of the kid. Regulation before education, right? Like the kid needs to be regulated, and before they're able to access that thinking, logical, rational part of their brain. But people often forget to apply it to the educator, right? A dysregulated student is not in a place where they're able to learn. A dysregulated educator is not in a place where they're able to teach. I think that understanding of nervous systems both ways is so critical.
yeah. And I think when you kind of do this self-reflection, it's easier for you to see it in others, right? So when I know this about myself and what happens to me, then when a student, again, a human, a fellow human, has their button pushed, then it's easier for me to recognize what's happening. It helps me not take it personally, right? Because in that moment, I'm like, I know what happens when my button is pushed. I know. So all I'm seeing right now is that they had a button pushed. And if I can say nothing else, behavior is communication. Behavior is communication. And the more that we can embrace that, understand why that is a true statement, I think it allows us to, again, help heal wounds, help to teach, help to impart knowledge, as opposed to any suffering. Going back to those words that we can throw around a lot in our field.
I always like to follow up that idea of behavior, behavior being communication with, what a colleague and friend Sort Schenker says, kind of behavior's biology, right? It's that even more fundamental piece of this that, our behaviors, so many of them are just hardwired within us,
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt here.
No, you're
I'll be
fine.
quiet for a second.
I told you I wanted you to. So misunderstanding too is, again, this idea about a student who is dysregulated, says F you, leaves the room, and then they come back with a fidget and a bottle of water. And I can tell you, this one has been a big one that has been part of my experience. I will tell you that one time Matthew Portell was speaking, and he told the audience, do not weaponize your administrators. And I never felt something more to my core, because I felt in that moment, this was kind of the misunderstanding that was in play, that I didn't know what when I sent a student back. And again, I had to pause, because again, it was about teaching and learning for the adult too, that why it was that I often would give water, for instance, because of its impact on cortisol, and cortisol is related to stress. If I would give them something like a hard piece of candy, all of these things have roots in brain science, so that I could get to, which is going to Bruce Perry, because I could not mention Bruce Perry in this. And this is his sequence of engagement. And I'm not going to go too far into this, because I wish I could talk in depth about all of this, but essentially this is just saying, this is the sequence we must go through. Okay. And if you looked at this model as a brain, right, we're talking about the brain stem, then we have the limbic system, and then we have the prefrontal cortex, where all the thinking happens. And so we kind of administratively, and as educators, we want to just jump right up to the reason. I know I have done this where a student does something, I pull them out in the hall, and I'm like, why did you do that? What were you thinking? What's going on? I don't understand. I'm like word vomiting on them. I'm asking them questions, and they are looking at me with no answers, which sometimes I just remember before I knew a lot of this, that just made me more irritable, because I'm like, oh, now you're ignoring me. Now you're just not going to respond to my questions. No, that's not what was happening. I now know that I was just trying to totally tap into their cognitive prefrontal cortex with my questions and my vocabulary and so many words. And by the way, I'm going to give you choices right now. And we're going to talk about the future. And that was such a bad decision. And almost every time did not lead to anything other than the student becoming more dysregulated, me being more frustrated because I wasn't getting the response that I felt I should be getting. And so when I started realizing that I first need to help the student regulate through relationship, I would get to ultimately the reason. But again, as a practitioner, an educator, it's like that teachable moment, right? Like, when do I want them to learn? And I cannot do that until I get through this sequence. So I learned that the hard way. I can tell you right now. So I say that with all truth and honesty. And this is my little, like, our students are down there in the bottom parts of their brain, right? And, I'm up there in the top part of my brain. We are not in the same place. And so I have to help them get up to the part of the brain where we truly can have a conversation. We truly can talk about, all the things that we want there to be learning around, like about choices and alternatives and reflection. But at the point where they are, when the dysregulation starts, or even as an adult, right? I mean, I just said we're going to talk about adults too, I have some adults that I work with who are absolutely not operating on a regular basis in their prefrontal cortex. They're in a survival state. They are dealing with chronic stress and adversity, and trauma. And so I'm expecting something from someone who cannot biologically give it to me. And that goes back to my man who got on my nerves last night. This is not about lowering expectations. Okay? It's not about lowering expectations. It's about being realistic about how we are created, and that if we are dysregulated, we cannot engage in cognitive processes like sustained attention, problem solving, prioritizing, organizing, decision making. I mean, think about that, right? And so when I view a student returning to an instructional setting in a learning ready brain state, ready to re-engage, I don't think that's a reward. I think that's the objective, right? We want them to be in that place. And if a bottle of water will do it, which is not really about the bottle of water, right? But when I have been able to help teachers learn about this, they don't operate from that place. We have a hydration station. We did a hydration station in my school last year. It was the most popular thing we did. Teachers were coming constantly because we also put out the learning about water and why water is so important and what it does for us and from a health standpoint. But it also became this place where people connected with each other. It got people moving because they would leave their rooms and come to this place. So, again, it might seem simple in one moment, but really it's the thinking behind it and making sure everyone understands the thinking behind it and the science behind it. So my man who's over there just talking about, lowering expectations, again, that's in bogus neuroscience. I mean, I think he's doing a disservice to the work that is truly making a difference for adults and children in this world and in our educational system. So I'm gonna try to not be so salty about that, because I know, guy, I know. See, take a deep breath. Okay. The only other thing I want to say from a learning standpoint is, if you, right now, people who are on there, look at your hands. I want you to look at them. Okay. And I want you to think about the age of your hands. Okay, guy, are you looking at your hands? Okay.
I am.
Are your hands the same age?
As each other?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know. I've never pondered this.
Okay. I mean, a lot of people would say, yeah, they've been with me the
Yeah,
same
I
amount
mean,
of time. I mean, they look pretty
that's why I asked
similar,
the question. But
right? They look pretty similar.
yeah, but they've gone through some
Can you
different
do the
things here.
same exact things with both?
No, 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 no. One's a little more skilled than the other.
Why?
Uh, um,
I
well,
mean, they've been with you the same amount of time.
well, that's true. That's true.
So that's so odd. Except to say, one of them you probably use a lot more often. You have a preference for, you practice with it a lot more often. So if we think about emotional regulation in the same, you can use this as your visual every day to think about this. If we think about emotional regulation as a learned executive function skill, we learn self-regulation through experiences with like co-regulation, right? And the more we use it and practice it, the more comfortable it is. So if I told you right now, you can only use your non-dominant hand, it would be very uncomfortable, right? You probably wouldn't like it. You wouldn't want to do it. You might even give up and abandon it. But if you really committed to it, and I every day said, we're going to do this together, it's going to be fun, we're going to make it fun, you're going to, over time, right, you would improve. That hand might never be your preference, but it might be easier and easier for you to use. And I think when we think about chronological age and we see all of our students and we're like, they're all 14.
Right.
Right. Chronologically, they are all 14. Your hands are 40 whatever years old. But there are significant differences in emotional age sometimes based on the experience that each person has had. So while, yes, this 14-year-old may be able to be very emotionally regulated and have self-awareness and self-management, that doesn't mean that another student necessarily will, even though they're the same age, because they've not had the same experiences. They've not had the same repetition. They've not had the same skill development. So again, as an educator, I get to spend 8 hours a day with students. I think I can have some influence in helping build some of these skills. I really do. I can't control a lot of what happens in their world outside of my building, but 8 hours a day is pretty powerful time. Sometimes they're going to see me and other teachers more than they see some people in their own personal life. So I have a lot of influence in helping build skills. And so I think about that with emotional regulation and how we can model it, how we can embed it, how we can demonstrate it, and how we can show them through co-regulation. And so I just always use the hands because it's just something, that I often just think about, when we look across a group, just because they are all the same age and we sometimes think, well, they should know by now. Well, your hands technically should also be able to do the exact same things at the grade because they've been with you. But that's
I mean, I think it's a great point. And it even, I think you can take it a little bit further even, but, this idea, one of the things that was really, I think, influential in my thinking around a lot of this related to the brain science piece of this is really understanding brain development. Because, even when you're talking about like understanding that, there are individual differences, there are different experiences, that not everyone is at the same place, even when you're looking at the chronological age. I think that even, especially when we look at younger kids, there's often expectations of children that aren't even developmentally appropriate for any of the children. Like we often think about kids in terms of like their cognitive ability as if kids, 5 and 6 years old have fully functional prefrontal cortexes, right?
All the time.
Yeah.
Look, I work with middle schoolers right now.
Yep.
And let me tell you, some of these middle schoolers look like they are grown adults.
Yep.
Okay. Physically, they are bigger and taller than me. And they try to convince you every day they are grown adults. And some of them live very adult lives. Unfortunately, they don't get to be kids. Okay. Their brain is still not adult. So no matter what they're trying to tell you, no matter what they look like, no matter the experiences that they have to unfortunately sometimes go through too early, their brains are not developed the same way as mine is. And so, it's just, again, it's just the truth. This is not like warm fuzzy. This is just how it is. This is the science of it. So, I don't know what else to say about it. It's not really up for debate. It just is. I did put up this information because sometimes I did talk about co-regulation, and by all means, you can share any of the content that I have as we go forward. But just in terms of like that, again, another word that's part of our vocabulary, just to make sure like what I view as co-regulation, and just, again, the learning opportunity that comes with this. I had a student recently who was absolutely having a stress response. They are nonverbal, and somebody observed they just hugged me. They just needed to hug me, right? And what I knew in that moment is they were going to feel my breath. They were going to feel my heartbeat. They were going to feel my embrace. And again, this was, I want to say, yes, this student, yeah, it was comfortable for me to hug them. And actually they initiated that. And I knew that the state they were in, it demanded it. But you know what? In that moment, I wasn't using any vocabulary. They weren't having to talk to me. I wasn't talking to them. I just knew that in that moment, my co-regulation involved me knowing that my heart rate was in rhythm, my breathing was rhythmic, that I was embracing them in a way that provided them that felt safety. So again, it's just very powerful. It's just very powerful. And so I know I want to make sure I get to her 6, but this was the next one about rules and the choices these students make, that they make these choices. And again, you're like, I do repeat, I've told them this 30 times. I know as a teacher, I would say instructions, I would get up there, I'd have them on the projected, and then, I'm like, okay, let's do this. And then a student will be like, what are we doing? And I know you're like, you're kidding me right now, right? But I will say this is Bruce Perry again, and this is the state, and I am obsessed right now with state dependence. I really am. So first off, let me say all functioning of the brain is state dependent. We know this. We can see this happen when, I don't get a good night's sleep and I'm really worried about something. I don't make the best decisions, right? If there have been times, probably as all of us can relate to, where we have said something in a state of anger to someone we really loved. We love them, but we'll say something really horrible to them. Again, it doesn't make it okay, but what I'm saying is that it may very much tie to where we are, our state dependence, how we store information and process information is very different depending on how we're feeling at that time. So in the top of this, you're going to see the states, right? From blue to red, from calm to terror. And so learning is state dependent, right? It's a brain function. So it's state dependent. So I want you to really, again, when we process this about learning, and it can change so very quickly. And when we have someone who is chronically stressed, trauma, adversity, this is especially true. And they may be in a constant state of alertness, which is kind of that yellow alarm to terror. That might be where they are more often than not. And so if you look at this table, and again, I just urge everybody to look at some of Bruce Perry's work around this. I want you to know what does this mean? What does this chart mean? For me, it means that when you're in the spectrum to the right, you're struggling to concentrate. You might be becoming more anxious. You're becoming more aware of tones of voice, facial expressions, noises. You might have a harder time communicating, and you might be more reactive. Let me give you an example. I had students who, if you asked them to read aloud, it was as if I threw a cobra at them. Okay? Period. Me asking them to publicly read aloud when that was something they did not feel confident in. Not only did they not feel confident, they felt that they were inadequate at it. The shame and embarrassment that they were feeling that was coming from that, I put them into those alarm, fear, terror points of view and states. So then you go down. So in those moments, look what happens to your functional IQ. Look what happens to your sense of time and what brain state you're in. So I threw them into fight or flight. And fight or flight can look like a lot of things in the classroom. And you know what it might look like? It might be like, I've got to get the hell out of this classroom right now because I am not reading aloud. How can I get the hell out of this classroom? I can tell her to F off and walk out the door because that will get me out of this classroom and I will not have to read aloud. It will work. Yes, it will. So again, am I saying that I'm not going to have a conversation about how we can handle that situation? When it's the right time, we can. But I also need to own that I need to be aware of state dependence and what can put students, what can put others around us, and what can put me in those places. It always goes back to that, right? So I just find this, again, we have students, we are so testing heavy. And I have students, my own daughter, we had to really work with her before state test where graduation was on the line, right? You had to have a certain number of state tests in order to graduate in my state. And so these are high stakes. These are no joke. She would get so much anxiety from these experiences. So we had to really work with her because if you look at this, what happens to her IQ when she goes into this alarm and fear? Is she going to do the best she can on that test? Is she going to really show you what she knows and has learned? No. I had one teacher before every test, she did something mindful, and she had a whole bunch of different things in order to get students in a learning ready brain state. It was part of her routine. Her students, and they understood why they did it. So, and they appreciated it. They would verbalize how much they appreciated it. And she gave different options because depending on which one would work for you. So I'm just saying, this is about putting into practice, but we aren't going to shy away from, are these the conversations you're having when you're talking about discipline? Are you looking and considering state dependence? I don't find that to be pretty prevalent right now. But this leads to the next misunderstanding, which is, you feel like you're putting in the work, you're trying, you're doing it all, and you're just not seeing the results, right? You feel like there's not a change. It's getting worse. And this is where I'm going to go back to, again, that concept of in instruction, we were looking for progress, right? Not perfection, progress. So, and data driven. So in that last one, it's like, I've told them 30 times. And I always try to think, okay, you told them 30 times. At the beginning of the year, how many times did you have to tell them? Well, I had to tell them 50. Well, we're making some pretty good progress then. If you started off at the beginning, you had to tell them 50 times, and now you're at 30, we're getting somewhere, right? And I think that idea of that it requires time and repetition, learning, again, back to learning, time, repetition, sometimes failure. We can say that oh, yeah, sometimes we get the most learning out of failure. But then when students don't behave, we give them a punishment under the guise of discipline. And then they do the same thing again. We're like, that's unacceptable. But I'm like, learning sometimes takes failures and reteaching, and they're not light switches. I'm not a light switch. So they're not light switches.
And that punishment itself is often traumatizing.
Right.
So what are you doing? You're increasing the trauma load on a kid that already probably has a trauma history, right. and you are increasing the likelihood that you're going to see behavior that you're not, it's just, people sometimes don't really understand that cumulative influence of more and more trauma stacked on top of someone right. when you're doing these things to them leads to more and more difficulty.
Yeah. And that's why with this particular misunderstanding, I think, okay, so your data is saying what you're doing isn't working. Now, in the instructional model, if you teach something and then all of the students fail when you assess what you thought you taught, you go, huh, something was wrong with that lesson. I need to reteach that. You look at the data, you look at the outcome, and you say, I didn't get the outcome. So you go back and you might reteach it, you might remediate, you might do small groups so that you can, depending on different people's understanding, you do all these things. Yeah. But here we're not approaching it from that mindset. We're not. And so for this, I just said, I just threw this in here because this is an example from when I was an alternative administrator. One of the things that I really valued is that we did every single day, we did SEL, we had an advisory, and it was also a time about connection and relationship building. But I was committed to our adults and our students learning more about their brain and body. And so, for instance, this is where we were teaching them about, neuro pathways. And because you can get really frustrated really quickly if you feel like you don't see change. But change takes time, and it takes, again, repetition. So we might start this field, and I like to use visuals to help sort of guide it, but you have this field, but over time, then you get the road, you get the paved road, right? It's not going to necessarily start that way. But the more and more you travel it, and you're like, you know what? We need a road here. So I only use that because I just feel like we need to know that no matter how old we are, I like this part. No matter how old we are, we can still build those neural networks and pathways. Obviously, when you're younger, they might be quicker, easier, faster to do. But even me at my age, I can still be building neural pathways and my brain changing. And I love that. I love that my learning is allowing for that, no matter how old I am. So to me, that is, that's the beauty of our brain, that this repetition can lead to change. So while, yes, at first it could be hard and uncomfortable, if we continue to stay with it and committed to it, then we will see the changes. We will. And again, it goes back to that progress. So sometimes we need to pause and think, I know I just told them that, but you know what? I saw them get it at least one time. So yeah, maybe they didn't get it this time, but they did get it before. So that's where you're starting to see that those pathways form. So it's like giving that grace and knowing that it's happening. It is happening. And as an educator, like that's those aha moments, right? That we just thrive when we see that it's working. So I just want to encourage everybody to stick with it. When you know this and believe in it and put it into practice, it will work. In my alternative program, I had students who fighting was like, that's how they operated. They were in fight mode. I did not have fights, right? As we started moving our climate and culture to being brain aligned, trauma informed, and trauma responsive, from the adults to the children to my secretary, school counselor, anyone interacting, we had this environment that was safe and secure, and they were not in fight mode, right?
Mm-hmm,
And we were teaching them skills, alternatives, not when they were in crisis. Again, sometimes that's when we want to teach. That is not the time. But we put this into place when they could learn it, so then they could put it into place when they needed it. But again, if we want to change any part of our brain, we have to be very predictable and make sure that we have a climate and culture that fosters a sense of safety and belonging, so that students can learn it and use it. And so I just kind of, again, it just comes to me. I just love this little visual. It just says, you've changed. And it says, aren't we supposed to? And I just think that's, change can be scary, but it's also this opportunity If we teach the science behind our behavior to the adults, to the students, as we did every day, make it part of our routines and even in our academic content areas. There's this great book that my students love called Long Way Down, and Jason Reynolds wrote it. And it was this opportunity, and I went in and talked about brain states because the person in it went through various brain states. And so it was a great opportunity in the context of the literature to do that, right? Doing an emotional map of a character. Again, my world, I can talk about some other areas too, but in my English teacher life, there are ways to just embed some of this into our content areas. So it normalizes it. And again, when they need to use that skill for themselves or for someone else, they've got it. They've practiced it. And always looking for those glimmers. And I love that. That's Deb Dana. Those moments of positivity that help us combat the difficult situations and negative emotions. And so acknowledging those glimmers and making sure that they're part of our spaces, I think is so critically important. Number 5 is not everyone in the room wants water, fidgets. It's not working. And I know, again, some people are like, calm corners. And again, I just have to say, you have to know the science behind it and you have to teach the science behind it. Throwing some fidgets in a corner with a pillow and telling kids to go there does not make it a calm corner. So when students understand its purpose, they understand what the fidgets are. Ginger Healy, the first ATN conference I ever went to, great conference, by the way, they did these calm kits. But what I loved about them, they had all of these tools in them. But what I loved the most is they had an explanation that you could go to, like a QR code, to explain each of those items, like how they could be a resource, how you could use them. So again, the knowledge behind it, so that if I needed it, I could then go to it. But I'd already learned what was a potential, purpose for it or how it could help me. Because, like, for instance, I would teach students about using temperature. Like, we had ice packs, right? I wouldn't just walk up to a student who's dysregulated and throw an ice pack on their neck. I mean, that is going to get,
that might not go well.
It's not going well.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this, because I had front loaded that learning and explained about how temperature, what that does for our brain when we're dysregulated. And I asked, would you like me to get you an ice pack to try? They could articulate yes, and at least try it, because I'd already taught them why in the world I'm bringing an ice pack out, right? It's the front loading of it.
Well, even the recognition that different people need different things at different times, right? I mean, there's not just a magic basket full of things that is going to make every dysregulated human feel better. And I think, underneath this is like the importance of like building those meaningful relationships with kids, helping them understand what their own feelings, I think about interoception and, understanding how they feel in their body and understanding what works for them. I mean, there's so much more. I mean, and again, it's always good to see like some of these ideas spreading in terms of things that you might do, but it's not just a magic formula, right? I mean, it really is individualized.
Right. So for instance, I just want to say, like, when we think about words, again, I'm going to push back on people who are like, calm corners don't work, because I want to know more about the calm corner that doesn't work. Because I bet, again, it might have that name. That doesn't mean that's what it is. That doesn't mean that's its function.
Well, unfortunately, we see seclusion rooms sometimes called calm
rooms. Exactly. And I'm like, is anybody getting calm in there? No, they're not. So then quit calling it that. Bess Harris is, I don't know if she's still on here, but, she has taught me so much. She has a program that she has fully integrated into her school. And back in the day, people probably wanted to call it in-school suspension. Okay. No, that's not what it is. Because that's not its purpose. It's not its function. It is not meant to exile anyone, to exclude anyone. It is not punitive. And so, again, when you have something that you put into place, what is the purpose of it, and is it meeting that purpose? And you can look at data. So when I think about what Jess has, Jess has so many different ways in which she has is so innovative. So if you don't follow her or connect with her, you must.
It sounds like we need to have Jess on the podcast too. So
you do, hands down.
we'll have to make that happen.
But my point, again, is like, if you want to look at it, the semantics of it all. So I know for me, we started kind of a model after Jess's climb program. And I had someone who was not familiar with it, and they were like, they wanted to call it in-school suspension. I'm like, oh, no, sir, that is not in-school suspension. And let me talk to you about why. Let me tell you what in-school suspension is. And let me tell you what this is. And again, it's in the truth and the reality and the data and the function and purpose that comes from it. It's not just me saying it, which is sometimes, again, we can call something a calm space and say, well, it doesn't work because I'm like, but again, you have to look at it just like you would instruction, like if it was a lesson plan and it just didn't work. You have to you have to audit it. You have to reflect on it and think about, maybe I need to go back in and do things a little bit differently, right? But I put this slide there is just as you said it, that connection piece, and looking at how we can use connection and community and collective care. I like collective care. Self-care, I'm not as much about it because I think, again, it's through collective care and community care that maybe we can ultimately get to being able to take care of ourselves. But I don't think all of us are naturally like, I know how to do self-care, right? I think though, as we come together as communities and work together and show that that's valuable, then we'll be able to move to that just like we would co-regulation. I think I see it as similar. But I do want to say trauma-informed is a tier 1 strategy, intervention, program, whatever you want to say. It's good for all kids. It's a win-win. And I love it. When you can get a win-win, come on, how many of those do you get? I feel like Ted Lasso, win-win. It's like it is all that because it's not going to hurt anyone. But boy, is it going to help those who, again, are wounded. But it's not going to hurt anyone. So, and this one is about the co-regulation, that they're missing instructional time. And it's not fair, and and I don't know what to say, Guy, with this. They're not learning if they're dysregulated. So even if their body is physically present, they're not learning. So, I know we have a lot of people have feelings about hoods. I hate that there's all this hubbub about hoods because I'm like, to me, that was always a way for me to tell students who are becoming dysregulated. When hoods went up and you saw them like close in on themselves, something wasn't okay in their world. It helped me know. And so when they were in that place, I don't care what I was teaching, they weren't learning it. They were no longer present. Their state was no longer in a place where they could cognitively learn about whatever English concept I was going over. So again, I just have tried to use different tools that you can use ahead of time. And that's like, this is a emotional regulation plan. And this is kind of just goes back to that visual of, we don't do this in the midst of crisis. Okay. This is not when I roll out the emotional regulation plan, when they're already dysregulated. I do this before that happens so that we can really have them as a partner in this to go through this and them understanding. And the whole point of this is, if we can help them know what they need to do, what we can do for them, we can get them back into the classroom, back re-engaged, back in their learning ready brain, so much more quickly. And that is ultimately, for me, that's the goal. So it's those procedures, those routines, those protocols. That's why when Lori talks about this, applied educational neuroscience it's not a checklist. It's a framework. It is a paradigm shift. It is how we approach really everything I do in the day. This is the lens by which I try to. Again, I'm not perfect, but I try to approach it. So for this, I just said, we want to make this something that we have as useful to them. And then this is the question that I get a lot about accountability. Again, the whole lower expectations. And really, I think the root of that question is where it's key. It's like, what does accountability mean? When you ask that question, what about accountability? What does accountability mean to you? What is the outcome that you're seeking? And are your current practices getting you closer to that or further from that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love James Moffat, another great educator that I
Mm-hmm.
encourage people to interact with. He talks about firm compassion. Zaretta Hammond talks about being a warm demander. And I love that because, again, it's not about lowering expectations at all, not at any point. But Einstein said, right, insanity is doing something over and over and over and expecting different results. And all I'm saying is start looking at what your results are with your current discipline practices. Are they working for you? Do you have fewer students vaping? Do you have fewer instances of the 3 Ds, defiance, disruption, and disrespect? How are your adults? How are your students? I mean, is it working for you, what you're doing? So before we start, I guess, criticizing being trauma informed, because I can tell you Jim Sporlater, Jess Harris, Megan Baldwin, all these, James Moffat, Dustin Springer, all of these individuals who are every day working in schools and who are trauma informed and trauma responsive and putting this educational neuroscience into practice, their data is showing it's working. So I'm very interested in what the data says in the buildings that have none of that in place. Are you seeing things improving? Are you seeing are suspensions helping your students make better behavioral choices?
Well, I mean, you asked that as a question, but we know the answer to this. And your friend on TikTok,
there are people out there who are trying to say that,
right.
And I'm just like, that we don't hold kids accountable.
Right. But what is that data, that accountability that people want? The sending them, suspensions, expulsions, corporal punishment. That accountability leads kids down the school to prison pipeline. Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of data to show these things aren't working.
But are they
there are many that are.
Data?
Well, I'm sorry.
I don't think they're stopping to look at the data. Again, go back to instruction. We always look at data to tell a story. I'm not great with math. I'm an English chick, but what I do love about math and the data, it tells a story. There's this really rich story from data. And what I'm saying is sit down and look at your data. Look at your data. If it shows that it truly is working, okay. Tell us more. But I did not experience that, and I haven't really met others that are sticking to this is how it was for me. I'm like, you know what? Some of you who said that got to go to a smoking porch in your school to cope with your stress.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to shame, but I'm just like, we're not the same. It's a different, we need to come on into this century. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to, these are some resources. I just want to show this only to say, go to Lori's site, because the resources that are there, so you don't feel like you're having to start without any guidance. You don't have to start she's going to give you the questions that you guys as a team, as you as an individual, you as a team, you as a school, you as a division, she gives you so much information to start the conversation, to start the work, to get busy doing it, and to modify things to fit, your environment. And so these are just a few of them that I just threw on here that related specifically to discipline that she just has on there for you, like right there. And it is rich and full of great conversation starters and discussion and places to begin putting your energy and your thought. So I just have to, and so again, that's the name of her website. But so I know, hopefully I haven't gotten too much on the soapbox, but this is, to me, again, I see and feel that we are under so much stress right now. We are coming to a point where I'm very worried about our workforce in education. We don't have enough individuals coming in to be educators as we have leaving. I want to be someone who offers as much as I can what I believe will help us be healthier and emotionally, physically, and allow us to thrive, not just survive. And so I for me, I work a lot in discipline. And so this is just a really important part of my job. And but it's again, it's more than a job, right? And this is impacting other humans. And so it's not something that we can just go to a discipline grid sheet and say, okay, you did this behavior. It says you're going to get detention and have a great day.
Well, it all boils down to a quote that I repeat often, which is the Maya Angelou quote. No, do the best you can until you know better.
Yeah.
You know better, do better. We know better today in so many ways, yet we're lagging behind. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking to myself, I don't know why this popped in my mind, but it was just like, you were talking about people leaving the profession, having a hard time recruiting people. Like, there's an opportunity, and you can tell me I'm crazy because I'm not you, and you have experience that I don't have, but I think there's an opportunity today in education to actually make education, make teaching joyful again, right? I think that when you begin to learn, yeah. I mean, when you begin to learn some of these things and change the impact that you can have, and the lives that you can change, and so many people get into this profession because they want to have that impact, they want to change those lives. And I think there's a real opportunity here, and we've got some of those tools out there to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Lori, and Lori, by the way, Lori just jumped on and said, "Thank you, Jodi. So grateful." And I was going to add that, I mean, Lori literally just wrote a manual on this, right? I mean, the body brain brilliance, and of course, we number of contributors as well. We had Lori and a number of the contributors.
Yes, I came to that. Yeah,
like there is. Some of this is overwhelming at times. The things that we deal with every day, and the families that we talk to, and the situations that we're dealing with can be overwhelming. But I mean, there are reasons to have hope and to feel like we can do better here. And I appreciate this conversation today. I think this is, this is how we get there. I mean, this is what we do. I think there's just a great opportunity.
There is. And again, there is so much joy. I know we have one of the most stressful, I mean, again, this is the research of it all, the most stressful responsibilities as educators. And, but there's so much reward in it. But again, I don't want to minimize that. The stress is real, the trauma is real. Mm-hmm. And as we build community, and I want to say this about this community of trauma-informed and responsive and brain-aligned individuals out there, it's a community, and we're here to lift each other up. We're not competitive. I want to give anything I can do to help someone. I want to do that because I get that back too. And that's helping me. Because I mean, 2 years ago, Guy, I was on the verge of burnout. I'm not even going to joke about it other than to say I stood in a cafeteria and I was in fight or flight because I was the only one there. It felt chaotic. I felt like if one domino fell, it was grape day. Middle schoolers and grapes should never come together. I'm just telling you. So I was convinced, I'm probably going to die by a grape. I'm going to slip on a grape, and that's going to be the end of my story. My little group called them little assassin balls. So I would take pictures every grape day, they're back. The assassin balls are back. But it was that year, I use humor sometimes to deal with my real feelings about it all. But, I had to use a lot of this. So this is not me talking at you. I'm saying I had to use so much of this myself, knowing my own dysregulation, and that I was there and I needed to be well. So I had to go through a lot of this and put it in place for myself in order to do that.
Wow. Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, and you're right. I mean, and I appreciate you calling out the fact that there are so many people that are, kind of doing this work, breathing this, living this experience, and the fact that it really is a fantastic community. But it really is. I mean, it's a journey, and I appreciate that. We've gone a little bit long here, but I have one question for you before we wrap up. But before I get to my question, I just wanted to share something real quickly here. There you go. Okay. So
That's a baby. I just want you to know that's a baby.
we can regulate for a moment, and then I'll throw my question at you. I figured you talked about pesto, so we need to bring pesto on the show.
I know. I'm so sorry. You're never going to have me on again when I'm talking.
No, I love it.
Sorry.
I love it.
Sorry, guys.
So the question I had for you, hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
You are moving into a brand new school as an administrator. You've come into that school. You found that many of the individuals that are working in that school hold many of these kind of misunderstandings or ideas that and aren't aware of applied educational neuroscience, aren't aware of trauma-informed approaches, aren't aware of many of these things. As an administrator, what might you do in terms of how might you start somebody on their journey? You have a brand new educator, hasn't been doing it long, but they're at this place, and they've come into a school, and it's the kind of punitive culture, and they're doing a lot of these things. Is there a book? Is there a training? Where would you start in trying to not even just change the entire system, but even just get people moving in a different direction? What would you recommend to somebody?
So that's such a interesting question, because I have lived that. So I would say this: I think that it has to become a priority. So again, when we think about professional learning, I found in one of the environments where the levels of trauma, I've never seen and experienced anything like it. So it was and again, so many dysregulated adults and students, and they were just feeding off of each other. But I had a hard time, when we had opportunities for professional learning, to get the conversation started, to get the learning started, that it was no, we need to talk about this instructional strategy. And I kept trying to say, but this is going to impact instruction. You know what I'm saying? When we're saying, why are the kids not learning? The scores, and I'm like, have we ever stopped to think they're not in a learning ready brain state? And so if we invest in this learning, its impact on academics is going to happen. It is going to happen. And so I think that, for me as an administrator, if you can't get it where it's going to be sort of across the school. When I first started this journey, a school counselor, Alex Tate, and we went into a room together with a pizza, and we had just watched a webinar on trauma, and we had started putting things in practice just with our caseload of students. We started ourselves, 2 people. We started reading, learning. Jim Sporlater, Watch Paper Tigers, was never the same. That man, saint. And we went in that room, and we made ourselves a whole plan of how we wanted to provide opportunities for adults to engage in this learning with us. And they were coming willingly. We did not say everybody has to do it. But what we had done, we had started the process, and teachers were seeing what results we were getting, right? So then we had teachers come, and they started participating in, we had little mindful meetups, and we did different things to learn about mindfulness. That's why one of the teachers was able to start incorporating that into her classroom. We then had teachers invite us into classes to teach students, and it started building capacity, right? So it's okay for it to start. Again, it was just 2 of us and a pizza guy. That's what it was. I still have a picture of that whiteboard to this day. I built a canvas, and we just put really good resources there so people could come to it if they were curious, building that curiosity. And then it started building and building. And so again, it's it wasn't about, it was not compliance. It was truly about being the consensus, right? I want to be part of this. I see it. And so we focus adults and students. So I just want to let everybody know, even if you don't have the ability at a school-wide level, which I've kind of been struggling with that myself, because you don't have that capacity in your position. You really can start doing this even within your own classroom, or maybe you and a thought partner want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
people will start seeing and becoming curious, and then
Sure,
you get
sure.
those opportunities, right?
Sure. Yeah, another Ted Lasso quote, right? The be curious, not judgmental, right? I mean, and
Exactly.
it starts with curiosity,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it starts with just, I mean, again,
Yeah. Yeah.
the biggest changes sometimes start with a very small effort initially, and you build it into something. Well,
Yeah.
listen, we've reached the end of our time. I want to give you a chance if there's any final thoughts you want to leave us with as we wrap up here today. But I really appreciate you joining me for this presentation and conversation. I'm thinking about, like, this is one of those resources, like somebody else watching this, like, share this. You're trying to bring about change wherever you are. These are the kinds of things we want
Yeah.
you to share and get to others. So any final thoughts as we wrap up today?
My just final thoughts is I truly do know that it's tough and it's hard out there. And I just want people to know that there is a community of individuals out there, even if they're not right in your backyard, that want to connect and collaborate and be a community to one another. Some of my closest friends, they've become friends. They do not live here with me. They live all over the country, but we have connected. And it's the most generous community in terms of knowledge and resources and support. So I know it's really tough. I do. And I don't want anybody to feel like they're being judged because of how they're feeling. It's really valid. It's a hard place to be right now in this profession. But I do feel like this framework, this applied educational framework, this trauma responsiveness, really does and has brought joy back to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that it could do that for somebody else, because it is joyful and it should be joyful. So
Love it.
I want to, I want to thank you for this time, for this space. And for those who joined and will join, I just want to say, I truly do appreciate that you have given me the opportunity to be part of your journey. I love for you to reach out. You can find me out there, or Guy can share contact information or whatever, but I absolutely want to be part of making the world feel a little bit smaller and safer and more connected.
Fantastic. A couple just final comments here. Joe said, great presentation. Lori said, thank you, Jodi and Guy, and excellent presentation. So much food for thought. Thank you for doing this. So with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap this up. And again, I want to thank you for joining me here today for this hour and a half. And all of those of you that were watching live, thank you for being here. And thank you for watching. If you're watching after the fact, we still appreciate you. So, Jodi, I'm going to ask you to stick around for a second, but we are going to let everybody else go. So with that, we'll go ahead and we are going to be out of here. Thanks so much. Take care.